Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding. His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Hi, this is Gabe Lyons, and welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas podcast. And I'm excited today because we're sitting down and interviewing Sho Baraka, someone who has been a part of this Q Ideas community for a long time, bringing his art, his ideas, his music, his acting. I mean, all kinds of fun things we're going to talk about, as well as never afraid to go there on difficult conversations. And so today we're talking about creativity. We're going to get into vaccinations, the Tuskegee syphilis study that took place in the African-American community many years ago, distrust in government, but also what does it look like to not be polarizing in a moment like this? What does it mean for Christians to be the ones bringing people together, seeing the good in the other, being willing to live alongside people that might have different opinions and different views? And that's what I always love about talking with Sho. He helps break it down as an artist to how we can think well about these kinds of moments. And so Sho comes at us from Atlanta, Georgia. He's the co-founder of 4th District and the AND Campaign, currently sits on their board, and also serves as an adjunct professor at Wake Forest School of Divinity. He's an influential hip-hop leader with Reach Records, and he lives in Atlanta. And so we're going to welcome Sho Baraka. Well, Sho Baraka, it is so great to have you on the Q Ideas podcast. Thanks for being a part of this.
And thank you for having me, Gabe. It's been a while since we've had a back and forth.
I know, man. I'm looking back at pictures where you and I were together co-hosting a Q Ideas back when we used to do events and could get in rooms together.
Back when those were the thing. Back when that was the thing. Back when MTV used to show videos, huh?
That's right. So it's just great to talk with you, and I've always loved and appreciated your thoughtfulness around so many different areas. And I do see you as a bit of a Renaissance man. I mean, artist, somebody who understands deep intellectual ideas and how they influence and shape culture, appreciates history, lots of fun hobbies. I mean, you make music, you make TV, you do so many things. I mean, you're just such a great artist. And so artists are often prophetic and help us to see the world maybe a little more clearly than we can see it in the middle of the moment that we're in. So we'll get in a little bit of that. But just, man, for people who haven't met you before and they're just getting introduced to you the first time, would you just share a little bit about the backstory here of where you come from, how you moved into this space of caring so much about the arts and creativity?
Yes, I am a storyteller by trade, if you will. It was infectious at a young age. My parents weren't creative necessarily. My father played professional football. My mom was more of an activist and I guess you could say a stay-at-home mother. But the things that they put in front of us just created this appetite for art and creativity. And then when you have 3 siblings and then a huge lineup of cousins, you're always fighting for attention. So in some ways, you got to be creative about how you get that attention. And I think that kind of just built something in me to perform. And then with my mother giving me this consciousness about who I am in America. She was active in the Black Panther Party when she was young. And so you kind of tether that activism with this artistry. And then she used to have me read a lot of Harlem Renaissance and study Harlem Renaissance for school. And when I did projects and reports, I couldn't do Martin Luther King. She was like, no, everybody's going to do Martin Luther King. I need you to do somebody nobody's heard about. So those are the kind of pressures that I had. So, but then, you kind of grow up, you live life. I have 2 older brothers. One of my oldest brothers was huge or my oldest brother, better yet, huge in hip hop, loved hip hop. So he was the one who kind of got me into rapping, actually. I was doing poetry. And then I saw all the girls like rappers, so I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna start doing this rap thing instead of this poetry stuff." And my another brother who's older than me, or another brother who's older than me, became a Christian while he was in college. I was still in high school, and he was more of like the my direct influence. And so he would share the faith with me and talk to me. And eventually the gospel snatched me up when I got to college. Long story short, met some individuals that you guys have probably never heard of, guys like Lecrae and Tadashi. And we were in college at the University of North Texas. And long story short, we wanted to start a group to proclaim the things that we thought the world was the deficiency in the hip hop space. And that was our faith, the things that we felt could change the world. If people are talking about their gods, we're like, well, here's the unknown God that we would like to speak about in a way that we feel is still authentic to the culture. And so lead that all the way up to today. I've been known as an artist, a creative, a speaker, studied television and film. So I've had some time in theater, as Q Ideas knows. We did a kind of like a showing of our play, the Union.
Amazing.
It's based on a 1968.
Yeah, such a
sanitation orchestra.
Incredible story and show, and you're such an incredible performer in that. And that was so fun when you and Greg Thompson, somebody else who's been around the Q world for a while, performed in that, and that showcase we did at Q. It was awesome. And
it was beautiful.
Yeah, man. And I love how your art is always telling a story, and mentioning even the sanitation worker strike, the history. History's been such a big, important teacher for you, and you try to do that in your new book. You use history a lot to try to teach and to try to help people become aware of some things that maybe they've not heard before. Your book, He Saw That It Was Good, Reimagining Your Creative Life to Repair a Broken World. It seems like a lot of people don't have a good grasp on history, that this is one of our great challenges today, and that we're not learning from the past. We're not learning from the way in which bad ideas move forward. And what would you say is the importance of recapturing that imagination and getting more acquainted with our history to know how to move forward today?
Yeah, I would say that I would disagree and say that we do have a grasp of history. We just have a grasp of history that is tailored for our own selfish interest. And we all approach information with a cultural bias, and this is not critical race theory. This is not
Get the disclaimers
Marx.
in.
Yeah, Karl Marx didn't send me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, but the reality
is like, people, like, just to affirm what you're saying as I hear it, is, the people who win write the history books, right? So that's how we learn our history.
Absolutely. You tell, you get to tell the story. It's the way for us to come to a reasonable conclusion after we've gathered all these facts. So what do we know about ourselves? What do we know about our country? What do we know about relationships? And I do think that there is a bit of convenient forgetting or convenient ignorance that happens. And not everybody is conveniently ignorant. Some people are ignorant just because they just don't know, because schools and people don't, engage in the particular conversations. And so what I felt is pertinent is that as we are talking about history, this is basically storytelling, right? The Bible is a history book. It's also it's a story. It's a novel, but it's the Holy Scriptures, and it's telling us something about the history of man's interaction with its Creator. And it's not about us; it's about God. And oftentimes, when we look into the narrative of our life, we think about us. We think about me, but we never think about, well, this story is not really about me. I'm just a bit player. I am someone who is passing through. The ultimate protagonist. The stories we tell reposition ourselves to the periphery, but put God in the center. And I think we would begin to tell much better stories. People will be more dignified. We'll be more charitable with our convictions. We'll be more charitable about the things we are struggling with. We'll be more honest about how we feel. But culture, industrial complexes, whether it's Christian, whether it's social, they benefit us to skew stories in ways that that can create platforms, and oftentimes we take advantage of that for our own personal benefit and interest. So yeah, there's a lot. I just love story. I love history.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about the idea of creativity that you write about, because I know you believe we're made in the image of God, therefore we are made to create, right? But for Christians,
yes.
How does this play out, and how should Christians think about this, especially those who don't think of themselves as being creative?
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we talk about creativity, we often think about vocational creative, like the arts. But the reality of it is that Genesis talks about cultivation in a way that is the responsibility of human beings. It's not, he didn't segment off the creatives and say, now, all right, you guys go cultivate and create culture, create society and ideas and products, and the rest of the folks will just consume. No matter where you work, you're participating in the cultivation of society. You are an engineer, you're cultivating something. You're a scientist, you're cultivating something. You're an educator, you're cultivating people. And in that cultivation, you're developing a product just to put it in business terms. And so as you think about your production, are you creating for the flourishing of humanity, or are you creating for your own benefit? And oftentimes the way we viewed work, the way we viewed creation and creativity is only to be esoteric and lofty, in the sense that it has to be ethereal. But the reality of it is that every day we are working, we wake up and we go to create. As God looks over the void and he says it was empty, he creates, and then he says it's good. Every Monday we get a chance to wake up, go to work, create, and hopefully when you clock out or whatever you do, you look and you say, this is good because I am contributing to the flourishing of my neighborhood, for my family, for the city, for the country. And this is why I feel like this book is not just a book for artists or creators, it's a book for everybody, because we all contribute in some way. We're all painting our image of God, and you carry that painting around and you say, this is how I view God. And oftentimes the way you paint God is like a tyrant, because if all you do is just go to collect money and to move up the social ladder, then your God is very much like a slumlord or someone who doesn't care about the conditions that people live in. All he cares about is your financial growth and contribution. And so I do think everybody is involved in this idea of cultivating and creating.
Yeah. Well, and I think as Christians, that's what we're called to do. Your subtitle for your book describes that. You talk about reimagining your creative life to repair a broken world. And this, I know 20 years ago when we began Q Ideas, that was the big theological conversation we were wanting to bring to the fore, because it seemed like it had just gotten forgotten in like modern day Christian discussions and theology. And that was the idea that the world's broken, but we get to roll up our sleeves, get creative, partner with God, and be a part of restoring things, repairing things that are broken.
Absolutely.
But to do that, you many times have to be educated on what was the original design here. Like what was this supposed to be? How ought this to be? And it takes imagination to do that, which is to me where the artists are just such a gift. What would you say, like as you look at our culture today, 2021, and we think about imagination? I mean, are you finding that imagination is vibrant for people right now, or do you feel like it's kind of closed in on them, and like some of the effects of technology and content and consumerism? Are we less imaginative people than we once were, or are you seeing it differently?
I see it as both. I try not to deal in the extremes, because I do see that there are paramount issues. However, what I will say is, like, there's two that I can think of from your question. One, there's the issue of culture wars. I think artists are being used as mercenaries for culture wars from just people who have particular interest in deploying these artists to snipe out the opposition. And I don't think that's how artists are best used. Artists are best used, as you say, as being prophetic and putting them out there to speak to the times where they're not really tied to any particular restrictive or polarizing view. Because I often feel when art is trite, when it's obvious, when it feels forced, it has less of an effect, because it's just a sermon now. It's just a lecture. But the beautiful thing about art is that it's metaphoric, it's esoteric, and so therefore it disarms the listener, and it gets them to reimagine a world in a different perspective and paradigm, and then you get to play with the boundaries. The other issue is like, yeah, social media is in a way advancing the cause for the artists, because now we don't have to go through pipelines to institutions in order to be deployed or to have distribution. However, I do think there's a little fatigue that I see happening, because artists are having to always be on. It doesn't seem like there's a time that you can take a break. We're always ascending the mountain. We're never taking the time to descend and live in the valley. And what ends up happening is you don't find respite, you don't get a chance to Sabbath, and you burn out. And oftentimes when I see artists who just don't take breaks, their art becomes terrible. And I'm just like, you think about some of your favorite artists and why their sophomore albums were trash. It's because they spent their whole life making their first album, and then the second album they grow famous, and then they're touring, they're traveling, their tax bracket changes, their world becomes a different world, and they feel like they have to live at the top of the mountain. They can't descend because they feel if I don't speak, if I'm not present, if I'm not always on, then I lose relevance. And this is why we see Jesus taking breaks. He retreats.
Yeah.
We see Moses ascend the mountain and he descends the mountain. And so the artist needs to take breaks, and social media is not a friend. And I also say that a lot of the culture around arts doesn't reward breaks for people, because we constantly want people to have a presence. How many followers do you have? What's this? What's that? And it teaches the artist that, well, the most impactful thing an artist can do is just be present and always on. So you have the issue of being a mercenary for somebody's culture wars, or being restricted. And I think a lot of churches restrict artists.
Yeah.
But then you also have this issue of always feeling like I have to be present and never living in the valley to develop myself and my art.
That is a good analysis. And I think, as I think about artists, I often see artists when they take those long Sabbath breaks. I mean, it might be an artist you just don't hear about for 3 or 4 years. You almost forget.
Yes.
It's like I saw yesterday, it was Lorde, I think. It's coming out with a new album, and they were talking about how she had 4 years off. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of forgot about her. But when artists do that, they emerge with incredible things. But so many other people, like you said, don't take that time off. They're so worried they're going to lose their momentum, and they're kind of told that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great analysis. The other thing you talked about for maybe our younger listeners or people who theologically are artists and they're wanting to like wrestle with something that you mentioned, it's this idea that in some ways art has gotten bastardized in the Christian church to be instrumental, where it's utilized to advance a specific message versus having this intrinsic value. Where we value it as something that has worth in and of itself. And like that one idea, I've seen young artists, when they get their head around that, the freedom they start to feel to go create the things God's putting in their heart, but not always feel this agenda that has to get pushed through the lyrics or through the music specifically.
Absolutely.
And in the communities you're creating, because you mentor a lot of people, I know you have a lot of offline conversations with other artists. You're in the room with them trying to create. Would you say that's changing for artists who have faith and who are Christians, that they're feeling a little more freedom these days than maybe a decade or two ago?
I will say, yeah. I mean, I'll speak to, the last 10, 12 years, 13 years in which I feel like I've been engaged in the industry. I do feel like there are a lot of artists who are finding the liberation in their own voice and their own platform. But there's two things that comes, two consequences, if you will. One is that they recognize the more liberated and the more autonomous I become, the industries in which I may have grew a platform in does not incentivize my liberation, right? Because there's a particular product that they want. And there's no shame. Well, yeah, some shame to these industries, but I understand why, for instance, if I can talk about like Lifeway banning my album, which was ridiculous. But if we understand the culture of why they did it, yeah, it makes sense, because culture, mothers and fathers, they don't want to have to sift through music in order to make sure that this is palatable for their children. And so you create an industry where it's like, oh, well, if you like Lil Wayne, or if you like Drake, or if you like Kendrick Lamar, then you'll like Sho and Lecrae, but they're clean, and they're not going to talk about the issues of that
Right.
You don't want your kid to hear about. And so, but the moment they get a hold of it and they hear it, they'll be like, hold up, these are human beings who wrestle with some tensions as well. So they may talk about some tough things. Plus, these are grown men. They're not teenagers. So I expect them to talk about grown men things.
Yeah.
And so now you have a problem and you get kicked out. And so one, the artist has to understand when you remove yourself from the particular industry, you have to realize that there are going to be financial consequences, maybe some social consequences. But the other thing is that they're going to replace you with somebody else, because there's always somebody else who is willing to take your place for that form. It's like drug dealers. Like police can remove one drug lord, and guess what? Somebody else is going to take their place and supply the streets with a product that people want. And so it's a revolving door that I think in some ways needs to be blown up, but I also get why it exists.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, you've been willing to obviously challenge norms. You've been willing to lay out your perspective, your story, and take the consequences when they've come. And I know you feel a sense of freedom when you do that, but there are industry consequences. But I know that also inspires people to not back away from exposing what they need to expose and what is true. As we look at our world right now, I mean, this moment, polarization, tribalization, it seems that division is just, it seems like every year we're like, oh, it's more divided than ever. And it just keeps going there. What do you think the opportunity is in all this? Like there's a hopeful side, there's a dark side, there's a hopeful side. And I'm curious, like if we don't participate in the redemption of what God might want to do in a moment like this, what's the dark side of this? What's the hopeful side that as you look to the future, you're like, hey, incredible opportunity could come out of this moment?
I liken it to the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a dark night, and we know that on the other side of tomorrow has to come. The only way, there's going to be great sacrifice, no matter what no matter if it's a dark resolution or a joyful resolution or a hopeful resolution. There's got to be, somebody's got to go to the cross. And when you look through great revolution histories and great transformation, there's always been some sort of revelatory act that's happened that took people from prideful to contrite, whether that be violence, whether that be war, whether that be some sort of famine. It's something, right, that shakes the people up. And we've had one thing that could have done it, which was COVID, and it did not do it. It's even intensified. And so I do think we're at a midnight hour where we're going to have to decide, do we cry to the Lord and act like, nothing's happening, Lord, remove this cup from me, or recognize like, no, we have to go to the cross. And what could happen is that the church can lead in a great revival of what it means to be salt and light in a dark world, or we can continue to argue as Rome burns down. And I do think there's a bit of, we're on the brink of either one of them happening, and I wouldn't be shocked if either or happens. Mm-hmm. But the Christian will have to learn how to survive no matter what the decision is.
Yeah. Well, I know it can be sobering to hear and think about that, but I mean, you're again sort of bringing some picture and color and even some theology to the moment that we sit in. And I do try to put, the hopeful lens on, right, of God at work and redemption and opportunity and revival and repair and all of that. But as you know, you get into the work of this and it's hard, it's messy, it's like, it's amazing how the enemy also gets into this work, right? And constantly is helping create division and stoking fear and creating unnecessary problems, right? And it takes relationships, friendship, and a lot of work. And not everybody's willing to go there or do that. I know you are, and you've been doing it. And you work even with the AND campaign and Justin and so many, just trying to faithfully help people, rise above some of these tribes and think well about what they're doing. And that's what we care about here. I'm curious, in your bio, right, you went to Tuskegee University.
Yep.
And the Tuskegee's come up a lot lately in the news because there's a lot of discussion around distrust amongst the African American community with our government as it relates to the latest vaccine rollout. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be just a high portion of the African American population that just is saying, not interested right now. And this gets pointed to, this study that many people may not know about, but that basically was a study that was an experimental study on African Americans that was horrific. In your view, I mean, you don't have to reveal exactly what you think about all of what's happening with this vaccine rollout, but do you think government mistrust is and healthy skepticism towards government solutions to our problems is something that helps us if we carry that, or do you see it as a problem?
Yeah, well, yeah. I look. I am a firm believer that the government is necessary. However, it is not the most efficient when it comes to getting things done. Historically, as you communicated, as a man who went to Tuskegee, as a man who grew up under the tutelage of a woman who wasn't a huge fan of government intervention, who's experienced some things, who has some kind of connection to like COINTELPRO, where the government was intentionally dismantling Black liberation movements and parties. And so I will say that my opinion is somewhat biased. However, I will also say that I am also, vaccinated. And the reason why I'm vaccinated is because it's purely for, I'm not going to say purely. A large part of why I'm vaccinated is for the benefit of my neighbor. But I also recognize that there are people who are in my family, close family, friends who have a distrust for the vaccine. And I am not of the ilk who tells people what to do with their body. I just, I don't. However, what I will say is that if you are not going to do it, how can you live in such a way that as best as possible, as much as you can control, live responsibly for your neighbor? And so I do think there are protocols, there are things in which a person who does not want to be vaccinated can still do in order to show love. And then there's a whole other aspect of the vaccine. Like, a lot of people struggle historically. A lot of, African Americans struggle historically. And a lot of people, you can imagine. And I'm not trying to say that all Black people are poor, because that's nowhere where I'm going. But if there are studies in particular communities that there's a great disparity in who's getting vaccinated, these people, who may be in this particular count, they don't go to the dentist probably a lot. They don't have regular doctor's appointments a lot. And so you just assume like, oh, well, I'm supposed to just jump and go take this vaccine and just, and act like it's all great. We don't know what the different types of social obstacles people are wrestling with. And so I try not to impress my own personal convictions on people. And I will say from another angle that I get it is, even though I won't say that I am a anti-vaxxer when it comes to the autism community, I've been around people who don't trust vaccines because of, autism. They felt like the vaccinations accelerated, the immunizations accelerated their kids' autism, or created some sort of obstacle for them. And so, although I personally struggle with that personal belief, I still get it, and I understand why some people will be skeptical with any vaccine. I am.
Thanks for sharing all that, by the way. I mean, I know it's such a contentious topic and issue right now to try to navigate.
And I say that because I have two boys who are on autism spectrum. So that's how I know, like, I operate in that kind of community. So
well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I think the challenge, obviously, right now is how do we respect one another's personal choices, and how do we create space for people to disagree, but do it in a respectful way. I feel like there's gaslighting going on. I feel like there's a desire to continue to divide and to continue to push people against one another, right? Even in the latest thing, the vaccine, right? We've had enough of this. Yeah. What does it mean for us to try to create space for the other, to try to, like you said, be compassionate, be kind, maybe have different points of view, but learn how to continue to live alongside one another in thoughtful ways? Because again, the science, it keeps evolving. It's like every week there's something new to learn, something we don't understand about how all of this is working. And so to have a lot of grace in the midst of that seems to me to be an important way forward. But
and it's really interesting, because I'll know activists who were, anti-government agencies when it came to your point, like vaccination or the syphilis testing in Tuskegee, or the sterilizing of women in North Carolina in the 70s. There's many different government interventions in which they've overreached their medical jurisdiction, if you will. But because it's politically expedient, people hold postures on particular things, and I'll say that for the right as well. I mean, there are particular convictions in which we all need to say, all right, are we holding this posture just because it creates some sort of opportunity for my side to win?
Right.
Or are we really, to your point, being compassionate and saying, look, what about the other?
Yeah.
And for me, let's be consistent about how we loving one another and doing it in a charitable and civil way.
Yeah. And as artists, the ability to think in the midst of the chaos, right? And the confusion where a lot of people, are going to go with almost what the group thinks. This is where artists can help us like get above and think a little better about our situation and what the opportunity might be for us. And I know you're doing that and trying to encourage so many people to do that. And so thank you for opening up with us today. Thank you for writing this book. Such a great encouragement, I know, to so many people. We've been giving it away, telling people to get it because it's such a helpful tool and a great story that's going to allow people, especially younger people, to really reimagine what creativity might look like.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blessing. Like we said before we were on air, hopefully I don't get too much trouble for talking on things I'm not an authority on. So,
hey man, I know. Well, God. I appreciate we love hearing from you and appreciate you being willing to just talk about what's going on in the world. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening in on that conversation with Sho Baraka. He's the author of He Saw That It Was Good, Reimagining Your Creative Life to Repair a Broken World. Get that book. And I also want to encourage you, the kind of conversations we were just having, those are the conversations we're having at Q Ideas every day through the collaborative. It's launching in September. It's going to be your opportunity to be a part of a learning community and a cohort that's going to take seriously all of the many current issues that we're wrestling with as leaders, but doing it within a safe setting, a group where you can talk and share your opinions and ask the questions. There will be no topic off limits as we engage in new relationships and friendships, but oriented around what does it mean for us to think well in this culture. It's going to be an 8-month journey starting in September all the way through the end of April when we host our Culture Summit here in Nashville. And you're going to be able to join with us every other week live and being a part of a virtual environment. We're also going to have in-person opportunities to meet up. We're creating a beautiful library of books and resources and articles and podcasts and things that we're going to be listening to and learning about in the months ahead. I know everybody's busy. I know this takes the kind of investment that's both financial but also of time. But I want to say, I think this kind of learning journey for the moment we're in is in some ways just priceless. It's worth your time. It's going to make up its value in the time that you commit to it by helping you stay on the front edge of where the world's going and what it might mean for us as Christians to try to lead in that environment and to practice faithfulness. And so I hope you'll join with us and join with me and so many others that are going to be a part of this, from Roberta Amundsen, John Mark Comer, my wife, Rebecca Lyons. Also, we have many different leaders like Andy Crouch and Preston Sprinkle and Trillian Newbell and Rachel Gilson and so many others who are thinking well about a variety of different topics. But we're going to bring them together, just like you're used to at the Q Culture Summit, where we bring together panels, you hear what they're thinking, you have some time to talk about it, but you have to move on. In this setting, we're not going to have to move on. We're going to get to wrestle with these ideas. And so I hope you'll join us. Go to qideas.org/cohort. And when you go there, you can learn more about it. You can see the calendar of all of these different sessions, how it's going to function. You're welcome to join us in Franklin, September 30th for our kickoff, or you can join us virtually. Either way, we'd love to have you be a part of this community year-round. So not only listening to this podcast, but then engaging with us so that we're thinking well as every week goes forward. So learn more at qideas.org/cohort.